over the years, a lot of cartoons have been aired and been canceled. It's a typical thing with TV since nothing can last forever. Some cartoons are good and have compelling characters that make the show worth watching. And of course, they're not always the main characters who make a show worth watching. I mean, that's where the concept of a spin-off literally came from. Take a character on any show who's more likable than the main characters, and then give him or her his or her own show. And in this video, I'm going to give you my top 10 list of characters who weren't used to their full potential in one way or another. So there aren't going to be any anime characters appearing on this list. Number 2, I am sticking 100% to animation. So no one from Power Rangers, Super Sentai, the show that inspired Power Rangers, or any of the mainstream horror icons will be appearing on this list. Rule number 3. I am only going to focus on main characters. So, a lot of characters who I really did like aren't going to appear on this list if they were in any way the main characters of their franchise. And rule number 4 is solely about ties. If there are 2 characters on this list that are tied, they have to be from the exact same franchise. And one more thing, although this isn't going to be a rule on this list, if I have any idea how the franchise will work, after listing the characters, I will tell you how I would write it. So anyways, let's get on with the list. The Fabio Brothers from Megas XLR. I just gotta say, Warner Brothers should seriously consider giving these 2 meta characters their own show. Yes, I know that they're meant to be a parody of Mario and Luigi, but in all fairness, yes, that would be the show. And here's how I would write it, even though a Super Mario parody kinda writes itself. I'd basically use all sorts of different fan theories from both YouTube and Reddit as inspirations for the episodes. Do an episode that might actually hint that the Fabio brothers are morally in the wrong. Do an episode that might imply that maybe saving the princess is not the best use of their time. I would do an episode that makes it more than obvious that the Fabio brothers are serial killers. And when I say serial killers, I mean they literally exceed all of the classic horror icons when it comes to the numbers in their body counts. I would have an episode featuring a parody of Wario, and I guess the joke would be that this guy has come close to being a hero than Fabio ever did, but for some stupid reason, the buffoons in the local kingdom completely overlook that, or that the Wario parody actually did something to piss them off, so they have been ignoring every single heroic thing he did, while essentially vilifying him for every asshole-ish thing he did. One episode would... Well, this would be the first episode where they save the princess, and they would not know what she looks like. They go out of their way to save her, and at the end, when they save her, it would come to the big reveal that she's either ugly or just really fat. As in, she had so much time, well, she had been locked up for so long, being held captive, that she had a lot of time to let herself go. And I would basically parody not only the Mario characters, but a whole ton of other Nintendo characters too. But yeah, all the Mario characters would be parodied. The classic ones: Toad, Yoshi, Wario, Princess Toadstool. And the parodies of both Bowser and Bowser Jr. would actually be just references to Bowsette. And I would kind of write her as a love interest to Fabio, with the emphasis being that he should choose her over the princess. I mean, every episode that would be the Bowser parody versus the Princess Toadstool parody, the episode would essentially imply that Fabio should marry the Bowser parody, or in this case the Bowsette reference, as opposed to the Princess Toadstool parody. And I'd also be willing to do an episode where the parody of Bowser Jr., the Bowsette Jr. parody, is basically Fabio's sidekick. Make her his sidekick for one episode. Merlot Blanco from Aqua TV Show. Well, to get the blunt obvious out of the way, this kind of show pretty much just writes itself. Have Merlot essentially hypnotize people to either get revenge, get something he wants, or even for attention. A show like this would basically work under this premise. Merlot either wants something specific or revenge. he would then hypnotize someone or a group of people to get it. They'd eventually wake up around the end and kick his ass. And yeah, I know it's a bit formulaic, but it would work. It could easily work. Minerva Ming from Animaniacs. I'd basically just do this. Just do what you did with her on the show. And I don't mean hide her away. The reason she didn't get as much screen time as all the other characters is because they thought it would be inappropriate. But they did have an episode where the Warner kids met the devil. They had an episode of Pinky and the Brain where they met the devil and sold their souls. And did an episode where Slappy Squirrel was guarding the tree from the Adam and Eve story. Yet, this character is somehow inappropriate. I could see parents taking more of an issue with the 3 examples I gave, so why not give Minerva Ming her own spin-off show? And did an episode where Slappy Squirrel was guarding the tree from the Adam and Eve story. Yet, this character is somehow inappropriate. I could see parents taking more of an issue with the 3 examples I gave, so why not give Minerva Ming her own spin-off show? I'd essentially write it as the girl version of Johnny Bravo. I mean, the really hot woman who apparently can't land a boyfriend for some odd reason. Most likely, I would probably write it that her standards are too high, and each man she dates has at least one flaw that ends up driving her away. Also, since Johnny Bravo had Little Susie, I would write in an equivalent. In this case, I would write in a Chinese dragon character who would actually be around 4 or 5 years old, who Minerva would essentially be hired to babysit. When she starts running out of income that she receives from all the men who want to date her. I'd write this dragon character as actually being independent and literally demanding that he doesn't need a babysitter. Constantly going off on his own, most likely either by force or because he's able to trick Minerva into doing something where he can just simply walk away and she'd have to get him back. I really think Warner Brothers should do this because, in all fairness, from what I've seen, any and all role models for girls on TV are 100% terrible. They are bad influences. But unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see this ever. One, because of the Animaniacs revival on Hulu this year, and because studios just can't get it through their heads that politics, gender politics, and political correctness do not get good ratings. Which is actually kind of hypocritical, because Animaniacs did do an entire episode essentially making fun of TV shows that put political messages into their storylines as a cheap excuse to get an Oscar. The Ghost Clown from ScoobyDoo. Okay, now here's how I would write it. The big revelation would actually be the fact that the episode where the Ghost Clown appeared actually didn't end the way we saw on screen. The big revelation would be after he hypnotized Daphne, he was forced to retreat, but made Daphne come with him. And then in the second half of the first episode, he essentially lures Scooby-Doo and the other characters, minus Daphne, into an actual city where he'd frame them for a burglary. Oh, well, yeah, it would have to be a burglary. Maybe he'd get Velma too? I don't know. I mean, that would be up to Warner Brothers, but these two definitely end up going to prison. And since this show would be set in the original continuity, the very first show, the one that ended in 1969, I would confirm that these two are draft dodgers. So instead of them going to prison for this burglary and not getting out, they would potentially face life in prison and would never be heard from again in the context of this show. So anyways, in the next episode, which would be the plot of the show, Daphne, in a state of deep hypnosis, goes into show business so that her new master can rake in all the money off her performances. And with this being in the essentially the continuity of the original Scooby-Doo series, there would be a second revelation. And that revelation would essentially be the fact that most of the other incarnations of Scooby-Doo were all in Daphne's head. They were nothing more than hallucinations or delusions she was going through while under hypnosis as the decades were flying by. And I would write this the same way the original Superman-Batman Generations was written, with each season being the last year of each decade. Season 1 would be 1969, Season 2 would be 1979, Season 3 would be 1989. Season 4 would be 1999. Season 5 would be 2009. Season 6 would have taken place last year. And it would also explain all of the celebrity guest stars, as it would have just been Daphne. Like, for instance, it would explain the Batman crossovers, because it would have been Daphne guest starring on the 1960s Batman show. Or the Supernatural crossover they did, in reality, would have been Daphne having gotten a role on Supernatural. And this would make a whole lot more... Well, it would basically make more sense than a ScoobyDoo multiverse, which is one of the storylines they did for one of those dumbass movies. And this would actually make ScoobyDoo, or at least two characters in particular, a lot more relevant and way more interesting. Season 1 would definitely end with Daphne becoming the new Marilyn Monroe and the ghost clown having become rich. And her becoming the new Marilyn Monroe is something that they would actually say in universe. That she is the new female star of the future, the big female star of the 1970s. And I know this might seem like cheating, but no. The show would be about this guy essentially controlling Daphne like a puppet in order to get rich, while simultaneously having gotten revenge on her friends for foiling his attempt at revenge on the circus. Norm the Evil Genie from Fairly Odd Parents. I really don't think I need to go into much detail. This is a show that just writes itself. I mean, it would basically be every character who, from Fairly Odd Parents, who isn't Timmy, Mr. Crocker, or Chester, getting Norm's lamp. He grants them 3 wishes. The first 2 would basically be something he would take advantage of, and it would blow up in the character's face, and then the episode would end with said character wishing that they never met Norm. And then in the next episode, it would just happen all over again, but with a new character. I mean, it would be kind of interesting as to what the other characters who didn't even know of this guy's existence would wish for, and how Norm could easily use it to screw them over. Okay, the number 5 slot is a 3-way tie between Poncho, Horst, and Hector from All Hail King Julian. I really like these characters, and here's essentially how I would write a spin-off using these 3 characters. Essentially, I would set this right after Madagascar and during the time of the Penguins of Madagascar, and the plot would be, with King Julian gone, these three guys are the ones who essentially have taken the reins and been put in charge. And they would each have their own motive for essentially becoming their kingdom's new leaders. Poncho's motive is that he is pretty sure he can use this opportunity to make a quick buck, most of which he would have to use to pay back a lot of the criminal debt that he owes. Horst, his motivation is that he thinks he can use being one of the Lemur Kingdom's new leaders to essentially get Marianne back. And Hector is only doing this because he thinks if he does, he can essentially finally shut everyone up so he can just go home and live his life. The first episode would essentially be these three running in an election because King Julian's gone. He's no longer here. He went to New York and he lives there now. So they each have their motive for running, and I would just have the episode end that it's a tie. And they're now the Lemur Council, who all three of them would essentially run the Lemur Kingdom as a council as opposed to a king. Jack Hoppity from Mighty Magiswords. I mean, this is a character whose thing, the fact that he's a method actor and treats every part of his life like the filming of a movie, essentially writes itself. When he met Vamber and Prohias for the first time, he asked them what their motivation was, and when they said breaking him out, he asked if that was some kind of musical. A character like this, who's a method actor and treats every part of his life like the making of a movie or any other part of show business, is the kind of character who deserves his own spin-off. I mean, the show would essentially be him encountering and or interacting with everyone else in the Mighty Magiswords universe and driving them crazy by thinking they're also actors in the filming of a movie. I mean, the comedy essentially writes itself. The Burbles from Thundercats Roar. Just basically have them go around Third Earth building stuff in every episode. And I would, if this was in another reality, I would have that reality's version of Lion-O give them blueprints whenever he shows up. Sometimes just for the plot, or to give them something to build. Other times, I'd have Lion-O give the Burbles blueprints to, say, build something, hypothetically build something on a certain location to hide bodies of a bunch of villains he massacred. If this was set in an alternate universe, but the Burbles were identical to their counterparts in Thundercats Roar, That's kind of how I would write Lion-O. Well, writing the Burbles as identical to their Thundercats Roar counterparts. Have them obsessed with building and helping people, and make it so they don't ever feel anything but joy. Focus the show on them if it's set in the Thundercats Roar universe, but if not, just make them identical to this version of the Burbles, and write Lion-O in as more of a shady character who gives them blueprints to help them sometimes, other times to cover up something that he did that he doesn't want anyone to know about. Like, say, butchering the mutants and having the Burbles build build something on the land where he buried the bodies, and have them install a device that would make it so ghosts can't pop up. Professor Venomous and Fink from OKKO. Well, this one can work one of two ways. One, I would actually basically just have a show that focuses on Professor Venomous and Fink when they weren't around KO in any way, either one of them. But the way I would write it would actually be, let this spin-off be its own thing and put it in its own continuity, where Professor Venomous would be the most successful villain in the world, and then introduce TKO as a rival character who Professor Venomous and Fink would have to compete with. Professor Venomous would start off as the most successful villain on the planet, and then suddenly he's being outdone by this little kid who's essentially his equal. The way I do it, with it being in its own separate continuity, it would kind of come off as very similar to Despicable Me. I am self-aware of that. More or less, it would be Despicable Me, but with one daughter and a more badass Vector. Watching OKKO Let's Be Heroes, Professor Venomous and Fink were two of the best parts of the show, and the writers barely used them. It would make sense to do a spin-off about them, and if I was the one writing it, I'd make it its own thing, put it in a different universe, make it its own continuity, and essentially make it Cartoon Network's answer to Despicable Me. Only in this case there would only be one daughter, and she would also be the minion character as well. Desiree from Danny Phantom. Okay, now, a concept for a Danny Phantom spin-off about Desiree could work in one of two ways. One, it could be a prequel and be set before the events of her debut in episode 6, where it's essentially just her life just after the Sultan's wife kicked her out, how she became the way that she is in the series, and essentially everyone who released her from the bottle up until the events of Danny Phantom episode 6. And 2, the other way a show like this could be written is kind of in the fact that Desiree's one of the few villains on Danny Phantom with a backstory, and the fact that that backstory is the most different out of all of them. You could easily just have a spin-off and reveal that Desiree's past happened in a different dimension, and it's basically where she goes after the events of Phantom Planet. Establish that in the first episode, and as an explanation as to why she was in the Danny Phantom universe since episode 6, you could just say that she granted some scientist's wish that involved the multiverse. It went awry and it sent her there. And this version of the spin-off idea would essentially follow Desiree as she's going around granting wishes. They go awry because she doesn't know when to stop, and maybe somehow she could have a second confrontation with the Sultan's wife, in which she actually gets revenge on this woman for ruining her life. Okay, and that was my top 10 list of cartoon characters that weren't used to their full potential. But feel free to let me know what cartoon characters you think weren't used to their full potential. And don't let that discourage you from throwing in how you'd write a spin-off about that character in the comments section. And if you liked this video and want to see more, feel free to comment, like, subscribe, and as always, have a great day.